Welcome to the Purposeful Lab, a series produced by Franciscan University where we explore the embedded purpose that we find in the universe and in our lives. And we do this through exploring some of the key issues that are affecting our culture today. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Keebler. I'm a biology professor here at Franciscan University. And if you've followed some of our previous episodes of the Purposeful Lab, you're used to my co-host, Catherine Hadro, being here. So Catherine has sort of moved on. She's got a full-time job, again, with EWTN, so she's unable to be with us, unfortunately. And so as we transition the series to Franciscan University, I will be the host of the Purposeful Lab moving forward. And I picked up, hopefully I've learned a lot from her and the way she does and runs interviews, and by osmosis have picked up some of her wonderful skills to certainly be missed. But we will continue on with our podcast. And I'm joined today by Dr. Steve Hildebrand, who is the Vice President of Academic Affairs here at Franciscan University. So, Steve, thanks for joining us and sitting down.
My pleasure, Dan. My pleasure. We've been together a long time.
Yeah, so interesting. Steve and I showed up at the university at the same time 22 years ago now, I think, or something like that. And Steve has risen to be the head academic person here, and I sit in the lab over in the science building.
You could have. You rejected it.
I don't know. But yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So what we're going to do with this series is we are going to use it to sort of allow academics here at Franciscan and the professors here to sort of address some of these big cultural issues that are of very high relevance to modern society, right? And so we, you're the sort of academic leader here at the university, so it seemed natural to have you sort of as a first guest here to sort of talk a little bit about the university, about the academics here. But before we get into that, maybe you could tell people a little bit about your background. I know you have a PhD in theology with a specialization in patristics, the early church fathers, and maybe tell us what got you interested in that, and have you always been a closet theologian when I was a little kid, and everybody had.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in northern Kentucky and then Texas, and school came more easily to me than other things. In high school, I loved basketball. It was my first passion, but I was better at school than I was at basketball, as you might guess. And I went to University of St. Thomas, a good liberal arts school in Houston, majored in philosophy. But there I really had a kind of intellectual awakening. I was practicing Catholic my whole life, a blue-collar kid, good parents, but not a deep intellectual side, I would say, to my family life growing up. I really discovered that at the University of St. Thomas. Fell in love with philosophy. Then I moved, took a bunch of theology classes there. Didn't major in it, but I took a bunch of classes. And it was a great intellectual and spiritual awakening. I would say the beginning of a journey, didn't know this at the time, but the beginning of a journey that really has come to fruition here. Over many years of teaching, thinking about, of course, theology, about God, about our Lord, about the church, about the human person, but about education more broadly. I mean, Franciscan is a different place, and really was the occasion for me to put a lot of things into place. Some of them even falling into place more recently. In my current role, I have a vantage point that obviously I never had, and really wonderful journey. Very grateful. Went to Florida. So I graduated with philosophy and actually mathematics as my undergraduate majors, and then had a wonderful mentor. He died a few years ago, Father Kelly at University of St. Thomas. I'd be lost without him. I still don't know what he saw in me. I mean, but it took me under his wing, gave me fantastic advice at crucial moments in my life. Met my wife at St. Thomas, and yeah, so then largely because of him, I mean, there's no really wonderful kind of epiphany about
Yeah.
studying in the early church, anything
Okay.
like that. Um, he knew this mentor of mine, knew a wonderful professor, Father Joseph Lienhard at Fordham. And when I expressed an interest in grad school, he strongly encouraged me to go in that direction. I had wide interests, still do, very
Yeah.
wide interests. So I probably could have studied any number of sub areas in theology, but Father Lienhard did early church, so
That's what you
I did early
Yeah,
church.
that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, we both arrived here at Franciscan at the same
Yeah.
time, and one of the things that attracted me to Franciscan and is the fact that as you're a theologian and I was a biologist, I was in regular contact with people outside of my disciplines, and the conversations you have with people outside your disciplines, where you can see sort of this cross fertilization and how theology can support science and science can support theology. It's something that's sort of organic.
For sure.
And part of the sort of a Catholic worldview. I mean,
Yeah,
do you
absolutely.
see that as something that drew you here? Is that something that you saw? Oh, that's something that.
Yeah, I wish I could say so, Dan. I mean, I'd never heard of Franciscan before, before I applied. Actually, Dr. Schreck, wonderful, long-serving scholar in the theology department, a great teacher, reached out to me. He knew my director, Father Lienhard, and they were looking for someone in early church.
Okay.
So I came, interviewed. We had just moved back to Texas, so I really wasn't. I was hoping we would stay in Texas for a while, and was surprised to be interviewed,
Yeah.
and even more surprised to get the job. To be honest.
Okay.
And so, yeah, my story is a little different. You probably heard Franciscan before you came, but I came here, to be honest, a little reluctantly. We left. We had been away from our families. We had just had a baby. It's the first grandbaby on my wife's side in 13 years. It broke her mother's heart. When we,
You're both from Texas. It's a long drive.
Yeah,
back
it's a
and forth.
24-hour drive. Yeah. So, but I would say after a few years here, really began to realize how special this place is.
Yeah.
And loved teaching, of course, loved the students from the beginning. But it didn't take long. I would say few years maybe, and we realized we wanted to spend the rest of our lives here.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe looking out of the landscape of higher education, right? Nowadays, and it's very much in flux. A lot of changes going on in higher education.
For sure.
Budget crunches everywhere, and a lot of bean counting things. But what do you see as like in that language? What unique niche does Franciscan have? What does it have to offer? The world in terms of its unique charism in the landscape of higher education. Yeah.
So as you know, we almost closed in the 70s.
Yeah.
When Father Mike Scanlon was interviewed to be the president. So by statute, of course, you know this, but for the sake of our audience, by statute, our president has to be a TOR, a member of the TOR community, so a TOR priest. And the board at the time interviewed three people, three TOR priests, and two of them said they would gracefully close the university. So we were having trouble financially, we were having trouble with enrollment. And I would say, may not have been on everybody's radar, but probably we're having some trouble with identity also.
Yeah.
And Father Mike, he said, I don't think he was ambitious for the position, but interviewed under obedience. And he said, if you choose me, I will make Christ the center of this campus. And for me, that decision on the part of Father Mike we're still living out the consequences of that. It's still bearing fruit. Yeah. And so what does Franciscan have to offer? It has to offer a place where the academic life is centered on Christ. And that center has grown to permeate every aspect of our life, including our different academic disciplines.
Yeah. And maybe you can give an example of that, because I think a lot of people say, oh, Christ is at the center of the academic world.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm a biologist. I got to sit and
Right.
talk
What does that mean?
theology in
Yeah,
biology
yeah,
class, which
yeah.
it's
Right.
much deeper than that.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah. In fact, so in my role now, I have to address this all the time with the faculty, and I tell them, look, we don't need to. It would not be good if your discipline became theology.
yeah,
So we're not looking for the kind of window dressing where you say a few prayers and maybe before class or whatever, or you make some kind of applications to the Christian life. I mean, the prayer before class is good,
right.
but that's not what we're talking about here. And I tell them at the same time, we don't want you to teach theology. We have a theology department. We don't need the biologists to teach theology. Right?
You don't want the biologist.
No, absolutely not.
You don't want.
We'd be all right. But yeah, so the disciplines have to remain what they are. The analogy that I've kind of stumbled upon and tried to explain this is marriage. Marriage is marriage. It's a created reality. It's not owned by Christians.
Yeah.
Hindus get married, Jews get married, non-religious people get married. It's a natural institution. We can talk about that later, perhaps, but part of the created order. It is what it is, and when the gospel takes it up, when our Lord establishes the sacrament of marriage, He doesn't change that fundamental reality. So it's integrated into the gospel. Its meaning is transformed, but it really remains what it is. It remains for us what it is for everyone, but for the Christian, there's a different vantage point. There's a new life that permeates that married life. And I think something similar goes on with our academic disciplines. Yeah. Biology remains biology, but as a biologist, your commitment to the Lord, your vision of the world, your vision of life that you study in biology is affected by your Christian faith and by your commitment.
Yeah, I think that's right. So the way I approach biology and see it as an entryway into God's creation doesn't change the way I understand an enzyme or so forth.
Right.
But it does give me something to reflect upon and a beauty. You don't
have a Christian microscope.
Well, if you find the vice president of academic affairs won't buy one. For
Right. What's wrong with the secular microscope?
Yeah. No, but but it's the way I reflect upon it and sort of the attitude I have towards the subject matter that is transformed, and you see God's glory and grandeur through it, and it opens up new vistas that are otherwise just sort of this flat discipline becomes almost three-dimensional in a way when you look at it. I think that's what we're trying to do here,
and that's the same for all the disciplines. And I would say, I mean, one of the problems for us trying to accomplish this integration is that the disciplines now, one of the many problems in higher education today, and this may not be the most pressing of them, is that the disciplines are fractured.
Right, yeah.
I remember as a student at Fordham, a graduate student at Fordham in the Department of Theology, that we would have these colloquia where the different graduate students could present on their research. And sometimes the guys who were studying Bible could not understand the guys studying systematic theology. Yeah. And I remember coming out of one of these thinking, this is insane.
Yeah. Even within theology.
Even within a single discipline. They're so fractured and so special. Now, specialization can be wonderful because you get a really fine understanding of reality. But the downside is that we lose that integration.
Right, yeah.
So here I think what great advantage we have is that everybody approaches at least with the view of faith.
Right.
Now, that's not sufficient. I mean, as you know, you've studied a lot of theology. You've read a lot of theologians in your work, like say on evolution with the intersection of faith and science. So you know personally that it's not enough just to believe and then be a scientist.
Yeah, right.
We've got to do some intellectual work on that integration. But to have that common faith-given worldview as a starting point is a huge advantage for us.
Yeah, no, I think so. And as you look at the faculty that you oversee here, what is it about the faculty that most gives you encouragement in terms of where we're going as a university. When you look at our faculty, what do you say? This is what a good
Yeah.
Catholic university should have
Yeah,
as a
yeah.
faculty. Right?
A few things. They're faithful. So as I was mentioning, that really opens them to the kind of reintegration of the disciplines
Yeah,
that we're
right.
after. The second thing is they're fantastically accomplished. I mean, the credentials, the kind of schools we draw from, the quality of the teaching, the quality of the research, second to none. We don't have a linear accelerator in the physics department, so there's some equipment needs that right now are out of our reach. But in terms of the quality of their formation, their handle on their own disciplines, their intellectual curiosity, I mean, you have all the time. You'll have people in computer science or other sciences, biology, come into theology talks,
Right,
and vice
yeah.
versa. You'll have
Yeah.
theologians and philosophers coming to a talk on, transgenderism and endocrinology. Or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, wonderful intellectual curiosity. So I would say fidelity to the church, to the gospel, and they're living that out, which is really important. And then the worldview that comes with that fidelity, expertise in their discipline, and then intellectual curiosity.
Yeah.
And those three things together, in a couple generations, are going to get us to where we need to be. When some of our young guys come to the end of their careers, it's going to be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. What do you think? It seems to me that we're drawing better and more high quality faculty every year,
sure.
and the same thing with students. We're drawing more and more students every year, in a time when the opposite is happening out there.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is drawing them here? Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a word, the Lord.
Yeah.
So, you and I have our own stories coming here. I feel like your work over the last 20 years has fantastically raised the profile of the sciences, not just biology, but all the sciences. And really, yeah, I mean, we can't flourish if God doesn't convert biologists and computer scientists and mathematicians, convict them of the truth of the gospel, and make them faithful.
Yeah.
When he does that, a place like us is attractive to them.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. So, this season, and we're having a number of episodes on topic, the nature of man and woman. So that's what we're sort of focusing on. And we'll have some Franciscan faculty that will come on and share their expertise from different disciplines. And we'll have some outside academic experts that share their expertise from psychology to science to philosophy to theology. But that topic, we sort of picked it. That's something that is not only, something that's rocking sort of the society at large, but particularly the university, right? So you have, men that want to house in women's dorms, right? You think of intercollegiate sports, you have men that want to compete on women's teams. So we're seeing the effects of not having a proper understanding of man and woman play out in the universities around the country and in the wider culture. So just, from your perspective as a theologian, what do you see that might be what's the root cause of this disconnect between, what it means to be a man and a woman that used to be, it seemed to be, there's a common sense intuition there.
Sure.
That has almost been thrown out the window, it seems.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you get the sense that all differences between men and women are meaningless.
Yeah.
But now, it's actually really important to be able to make some distinctions. Cultural differences in custom, some differences in role. I remember, she's dead now, so I can say this, but when my wife and I were married, first married nearly 25 years ago, she had an aunt, an older aunt, who, when she discovered that I did dishes, was appalled. Like, well,
Most women nowadays would be enthralled.
right. So she actually corrected my wife
Yeah.
and said, "Look, this is not right. Like, he should not be doing this. That's your job." So I feel like what's happened is we've lost a sense of those distinctions. We've lost a sense of, I'm sure in your house, as in mine, you have a kind of division of labor. So, you got a gaggle of kids, and you got a bunch of jobs to do, and you divide them up. There are ways to divide them up, but a lot of those ways need not have any reference to sex or gender.
Right.
But we've kind of lost a sense that there are some things that are actually meaningful. We've lost a sense that there's a givenness to reality. So obviously these things are plastic. If you and your wife want to divide the labor so that you do the cooking and she does the dishes, or you both do them together, or whatever, however you're going to divide it, it doesn't matter. But we've lost the sense that there are some things actually that do matter, that there's a givenness to reality that we can't change, that we're not free to change.
Right.
And that if we try to change them, we end up destroying ourselves. And I don't know. Sometimes I think that the givenness to reality, we've lost that because we've lost a sense of God. So you could think of the progress of secularism.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no God I'm going to think of the name of our podcast, right? If there's no God who establishes a purpose and a design and an order that's given to us, that the Lord gives us all kinds of freedoms, and we can talk about that. But if there's no givenness, then we get the idea that everything comes from us.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because in science, you can't do science without a priori assuming that there's a givenness to the universe. Right. There's something there.
It has to be repeatable.
That I meant, it's repeatable, it's regular, that I can, and I have the capacity because of my God-given reason to partially at least understand that. And it's real, right? Absolutely. Rather than, so we make that assumption. And it's weird because as a society, we almost overvalue science, right? But the assumption there's a givenness to science. There's a reality there that if science shows it's there, it's true. But then we come back to something like sex, which science can show, well, there's male and female in the animal kingdom. There's sperm and there's eggs. There's two gametes there. But then we pull back and say, in that area, well, there isn't a givenness there. It's sort of something imposed on me, and I can throw it off if I want.
Yeah, that's good. That's a great point. So we kind of truncate the givenness of reality and say, look, okay, maybe there's a givenness in these material things and the function of atomic particles or whatever.
Quarks, okay.
But then once you get outside of that, it's a free-for-all. Like there's no more order. There's no more givenness.
Yeah.
And then what happens is you're actually free to change in this kind of mistaken view of freedom.
Right.
You're free. Then even the givenness that you find in the material world through science, even that givenness is open to your arbitrary whim, and you can change it as you see fit. As you were talking, I was thinking when we first met, I don't know if you're still into this, but you were into experimenting with fruit flies.
Yeah, I still have some fruit flies in the lab. I torture every once in a while.
Well, but the whole point you were saying, if I remember right, you were trying to discover the genes in the fruit fly that set them up for epileptic reactions and so on. And the whole point of that, like you would try, okay, I'm gonna isolate this gene or inject or introduce this environmental change or whatever. But the whole assumption is that there's a stable order for you to find. I mean, if the game is changing every time you come back to experiment,
why bother?
Right, you can never figure it out. Yeah. Right, so
maybe that's why I never got any good results. No.
I kept hoping and praying that you would discover the cure for epilepsy, the cause, and then the cure. And then we would be on our way to $1 billion endowment or something,
Sorry to disappoint.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, if that order is not there to discover, there's no purpose, there's no meaning. So sometimes we'll allow in our culture, in our world, we'll allow that to science. Okay, there's an order in science. But then we won't extend it. We could truncate that, abbreviate it. We won't extend it to other parts of life.
Yeah.
And so, there will be no order in the realm of psychology, no order in the realm of spirituality or philosophy.
Yeah. It's almost like those orders that deal with like our personal autonomy. When you get to that, we don't want that. Yeah, there's order in the sunlight because I can't do anything about that. The sun's going to shine light, on me, and it's going to have certain properties.
Yeah.
But when it comes to my personal autonomy, I can actually now with technology do things to mess with my body if I want to, right? And so once we have that ability to control, say, well, there's no givenness or order here that actually matters. Okay, maybe there's something here, but it's arbitrary, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So what we've lost is the ability to find happiness in the givenness of things.
Yeah.
In the givenness of our reality. So, the idea that a man can only find happiness if he can make himself into a woman, he gets that into his mind. So there's got to be a surrender to reality and almost like a confidence in the Creator. Like, look, if you surrender to this order, there's plenty of freedom within that. You surrender to that order. There's plenty of room for creativity and freedom. You'll be happy. You'll flourish.
Yeah, that's good. Anyway, because you surrender to being I'm male, right?
Yeah.
But there's plenty of ways to live that out in the freedom to live out that maleness in a way that is in line with God's plan and so forth. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you study these things, you realize there are different personalities among men. I mean, there are patterns. This psychologists study this kind of stuff. You find, like the personality trait of agreeableness is more common among women than among men, but it's among a lot of men.
No, it's not.
You're right. Yeah. So if you just study things, you realize there's a great variety. And so sometimes what can happen is, if you have this artificial notion of what it means to be a man, and you're mistaking cultural forms of masculinity with what is truly given, you're going to feel trapped, And I think one of the problems now is that some people feel trapped by what is given. That if they don't have this absolute freedom, somehow they can't find meaning in life. And it's really deceptive because, of course, as we know, and you'll get into this in later episodes with people more expert than I, but it's usually a pretty sad journey, the people who are exercising or trying to exercise these absolute freedoms and undergo sex change operations or whatever. There's pretty good evidence that it doesn't end well. We don't flourish. We're creatures, right? I mean, creatures flourish in the givenness of things. You flourish in being what you are, not trying to be what you're not.
Mm-hmm. No, that's so true. I mean, it like the confusion on sex seems to be one of the extreme versions of lacking this view of purpose. It's like, so
for sure.
So when
for
you
sure.
really lack purpose in your life or direction, then it's like, okay, well, I've got to change something, and I don't know, but I'm just going to make it and whatever I want. But do you see? I mean, you've been teaching here for 20-some years. Do you see students coming in? Franciscan's a unique place, but you still, these students come from the wider culture.
Sure.
So do you see students coming in with some traits now that they didn't have 20 years ago that are where they're picking up some of this relativism in the culture and are unable to sort of articulate some of this givenness?
A little bit, for sure, Dan. I mean, you're right. They come from the culture. I would say but we don't have real significant problems with transgenderism or gender dysphoria.
Sure.
But we have plenty of students, too many students who have mental health problems. like as you say, they're coming from the culture. We have COVID kids. It's not like our kids, or I call them kids, but our students, it's not like they were spared the effects of COVID,
Right.
the effects of the shutdown,
Mm-hmm.
the spikes in mental illnesses, anxiety,
Yeah.
depression, and so on. So we see our fair share of those things. But I would say what makes our students largely different is that just as it's a conversion worked by the Lord that makes our place attractive to faculty, oftentimes that happens with the students too.
Yeah.
So they come all manner of intellectual abilities. They come with all manner of intellectual preparation, like any other place. But so many of them come with faith. So if you have faith, there's an openness to the givenness of things.
Yeah.
You're open to the surrender of your life to God, that open to the idea that you're going to find happiness in His plan
His
for
plan,
you.
not your plan.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
No, that's a great point.
Yeah.
You said something earlier I wanted to come back to. You
Sure.
said something about, we were talking about the university or something, it's a natural institution. You mentioned like marriage as
Yeah.
being a natural institution, the man and woman in a marriage. How does like a Christian understanding of that, sort of transform that, but at the same time, not undo that givenness, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So, like I was saying earlier, sometimes you can edit this out of the podcast if you think it's inappropriate. But sometimes I'll joke, look, Christians don't propagate the species by prayer. It doesn't change the reality of marriage. So marriage is still between a man and woman, one man and one woman. It's still procreative. But that givenness is transformed. I mean, think of a Christian view of having children. So you have, obviously, human beings have been having children for many thousands of years.
Yeah.
But a Christian looks at his wife as a friend in Christ, as a sister in Christ.
Right. Yeah.
A Christian looks at his children as individual creatures of God, invested with dignity, given a vocation. Christians can't have children and then put them to a utilitarian purpose.
Right. Okay.
You can't have children to work the farm. You can't have children to do your work. You can't have children so that they'll take care of you.
When you're old.
Right. I mean, I'm kind of hoping for that. I'm kind of hoping we have 8, so I'm hoping you have 7. So I'm hoping
6.
you have 6. Okay. So I'm hoping that 1 will take care of it. So I have a 1 in 8 chance. You got a 1 in 6.
Yeah.
But that's not why you have them.
Right.
So that the Christian view, you look at them differently. They have God-given vocations. They have their own purpose given to them by God, their own value, their own dignity.
Yeah.
So I mean, in some cultures, especially the past, you would look at children almost as commodities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a Christian marriage, obviously you can't do that. You can't look at your wife that way. But I think it's taken us a long time to get to this point. St. Augustine has this funny line. He's, of course, toward the end of his mother's life. So he came into the church when he was 30 or so, was baptized. And then after his baptism, he and his mother and his friends were going to go back home to North Africa. Yeah. And his mother, St. Monica, died before they could get back there. And they had these wonderful sort of intellectual, philosophical, theological conversations before and after his conversion, before and after his baptism. And he makes this quip in the Confessions that it's as if she's a man, because in that culture, your wife is not your friend.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
A woman is not your friend. If Augustine wanted a friend, he'd have his male friends, as he did. But you could see his relationship with his mother breaking that really restrictive kind of cultural barrier. Yeah. And really the Lord doing that by granting them together these mystical experiences, this wonderful communion with each other and with Him.
Yeah.
So Christianity has the ability to break those cultural norms that really have no place it doesn't dissolve the givenness of reality, but it dissolves what doesn't belong.
Yeah. And it seems like that's what it partly fueled. So this escape from masculine and feminine roles is like women felt restricted or so
for
forth.
sure.
Men felt dominant, like they could dominate and so forth. So you have this
Right.
these roles that people wanted to get rid of. In one way, let's deny that there are roles at all.
That's
Let's
right.
deny that there's
Yeah.
sexes at all, and we can do what we will. And
right.
people say, well, how would you respond to somebody say, well, that gives me freedom now. I can do what I want, and I can create. And the church, though, it doesn't view it that way. They view that there's a givenness, and
That's right.
there are certain things that as a male, that is who you are, right?
Yeah.
Why doesn't that restrict my freedom and my happiness? Right?
That's right. And to me, so I think Christianity has the power to, as I said, to dissolve these kind of artificial cultural customs and barriers to flourishing, which are real.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you think of the institutions like slavery, definitely the way women have been treated over the centuries. I don't think it's consistent with the gospel to deny women the right to vote.
Right.
Yeah. That's not too long ago in our own country.
Right.
Women had the right to vote. So I feel like Christianity has the power to dissolve all those things. But what I wanted to say is, I feel like nowadays there's a special burden on men.
For sure,
So men, it seems to me, have to take on a nobler vision of themselves and of women to give women the rightful freedom to flourish.
Yeah.
That the way the Lord has kind of set up our differences, there's a lot that falls to us. It's a terrible and a painful irony that so many victims of the transgender ideology are young girls, right? That you have, you have some good feminism that led to some bad things, but also to some good things, to some dissolution of these artificial cultural boundaries and barriers and so on. But then this terrible twist that the same forces that were for feminism, and too often for a kind of bad kind of feminism, end up now inflicting this ideology on women. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The men have to step up, I think.
For sure. So what, as we're getting towards the end of our time here, what is, in your view, what's the positive vision that the church has? And before we go to that, what is the role, say, that Franciscan University has, and that academically to speak to the wider culture on this issue? What do you see as its role, right? Not only across the university systems in academia, but across the wider culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think what comes to my mind first is just the example of our students and our faculty.
Yeah.
So when people come here, they experience our culture, they meet our students, they realize that you can find purpose and meaning in life. You can be happy and joyful and accept the Lord's plan for you.
Yeah.
So that's, for some, coming from this kind of realm of absolute freedom, this would be counterintuitive.
Right.
Like you're happy in a marriage with 6 kids or 8 kids, or you're happy with all of the sacrifice that come with raising these kids, for both, for us as husbands and for our wives. Your students are happy going to mass and praying and accepting God's plan for them, rather than trying to
impose their will.
Impose their own. Right, exactly. Yeah. So to me, that's a very powerful. We lose sight of that because we've been here so long.
Yeah.
We see it all the time. But it's a wonderful reminder of this when we get people who've never been to campus who come, parents for the first time.
Yeah. No, you do
right.
see that.
Teachers for the first time. Sometimes I'll review with prospective faculty our understanding of religious freedom. So interviewing them, I'll say, like, this is how we view freedom. I try to lay all this stuff out. And sometimes the reaction is, when I tell them, look, this is our compendium on human sexuality.
Yeah.
There are certain things we're going to ask you not to do, and you have to be comfortable with that, And almost always the reaction is, "You mean you're not gonna force me to
you to
use
do this."
pronouns or like, no, we're actually asking you not to do that."
Yeah.
And they find it liberating. So I can see that in our faculty even before we hire them. They find the ordered love of our community liberating.
Yeah, you give them
For
the
sure.
freedom to follow what
Right.
they're meant to follow. in a
That's right.
sense, Yeah.
Yeah. Freedom to I go back to that point. Freedom to express what the Lord has put in their hearts. This is a place where one person said, "You mean so you would be okay if I'm openly Christian?" Yeah, actually.
We'll put up with it.
Yeah, that's good.
So, the last question for you is,
Sure.
is a broader one. For beyond Franciscan, the church as a whole. What is, the vision that it articulates, and how best can it articulate that to a culture that has lost the sense of the dignity of man and woman? What's the liberty message that the church has?
Yeah, my mind, as you asked that, immediately goes to a passage from Pope Benedict's Jesus of Nazareth.
Okay.
I don't have it quite memorized, so I'll paraphrase it. He says, what does Jesus bring? If he doesn't bring an end to world hunger, he doesn't bring world peace, he doesn't bring an end to suffering, what does he bring? And Pope Benedict answers that series of questions. He put it more beautifully than I did. But he says, he brings God. He brings God. So the church brings God. The church brings our Lord and everything that comes with that. Purpose, meaning, forgiveness, flourishing, joy, happiness. Yeah.
All those things we're searching for. And even,
That's right.
the people that can't find it, that's what brings them their suffering, is that they're searching for it in the wrong places. And it's
Exactly.
They long for God, even though they don't necessarily recognize that. So
yeah, thank you, Dan. I want to thank you for doing this podcast. I think it's great. Fits perfectly with who we are. The lineup that you have this year on this issue of man and woman is fantastic, and I think it's going to be a great series. If they can get past this initial one with me, they'll be off to
better.
they'll be off to the races.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Steve, for sitting down with us, and for listeners, as Steve said, stick with us this series. We'll be having 5 more episodes of this series exploring the nature of man and women from all different disciplines, and exploring from different disciplines, all in line with the wisdom of the church. So thanks for joining us on Purposeful Lab, and we appreciate you listening.